Welcome to Inflection Points, a podcast about technology and big ideas from the office of the CTO at Extreme Networks.
Carla, I'm feeling a little bit old today. My bones are achy.
Just today? It's just today?
Just today.
I feel like we have that conversation on a fairly regular basis.
That's fair. Do you remember the days of living in a household without a computer? So there's my answer.
Sort of. Ooh, I had to think about it. Yes. When I was a child, we did not have a computer, but I'd say that happened around like age 11, maybe.
Okay. All right. So we are definitely from two different generations.
I'm aware.
And, I noticed that before we started this podcast, I had to get your attention as you were, heads down in Instagram. So
I don't know what
thanks for joining today.
I'm so happy to join. Thanks for also insulting my generation. I really appreciate it. We just want to document all the fun that we're having on the day to day. That's what a Millennial 1.0 does.
Fantastic.
That's what we do.
Well, you have made everything look shiny and wonderful, and I'm sure you've done a lot of traveling.
Yes, well, I need to get my hit off of all of the engagements I get from social media. You better like that later. I'm going to chase you to like it later because all the likes, they're important.
Do you care about likes from a Gen Xer like myself?
No, not really.
It's good to know. I feel valued. I feel ready for this episode. Let's look at what we've just done to ourselves. I have a sense of what's normal for my age range and my generation, and you have a sense of what's normal for yours.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to go travel the world and I'm going to Instagram about it. It's going to be great.
I look forward to following you, I believe is the term.
Yes, you follow.
Right. Great. So today we're going to talk about some of those generational differences and how those differences impact the Office of the CTO's perspective of the infinite enterprise. And the Office of the CTO at Extreme Networks is designed to come up with big ideas and to find new ways of being able to bring technology to society and to help make positive change.
Yep. And also we have to obviously think about how we create technology for different generations who have a different definition of what normal is from their technology and what they expect from their technology. So yeah, it's important for us to always keep an eye on that. And I think that is one thing that we haven't really discussed. I mean, it's been kind of brought up in some of the episodes. We sort of danced around it, but we haven't really talked about, how are different generations going to respond to this? Because we've said, it's definitely going to change after the pandemic and we're not going back to normal. But let's face it, part of that shades of gray of different normal is going to be based on, how comfortable do you feel about technology and how normal, quote unquote, I'm putting air quotes on a podcast, is that?
Yeah, true. And my experience has been that, when I speak to my father, who is a boomer, his experience is a cold sweat when he's unplugging his VCR. Right. And my experience is frustration at that because I'm thinking, he should know how to do this. He's a very smart individual, but then I think of the things that I don't know about current technologies that I'm learning about so that I can remain relevant and to be able to provide valuable input into where we're going. Being able to have somebody who is outside of our experience, outside of our technology development, outside of these ideas and outside even of the infinite enterprise concept, I think is really important.
So what we have today, and I think to your point, what's going to be really important to have someone bring that outside perspective is when we started talking about how do we talk about generations, I thought, who we need to talk to? We need to talk to an expert marketer because marketers, their job day in and day out is to be thinking about different customer bases, different consumers. How are they ingesting information? How do they process that information? And I'm really excited because we have just one of the best guests. I'm very excited she was able to join us. We have Michelle Tafler. She's Senior Vice President of Client Services for Gene Agency, which is a health, it's an agency based in Toronto that focuses entirely on health brands, right? And she's worked with major consumer brands like Honda. She's also worked with Johnson & Johnson. So her job for forever, she's an expert at it, has been how do these different consumers interact with these different brands? And that's really important. And I'm excited to get to talk to her about how does she think that these different generations are going to react to the infinite enterprise? And how do they perceive this technology and use this technology? And she's gonna give us some real perspective on, what other people are thinking.
And reiterating, the infinite enterprise is really about that individual experience, right? It's about being able to have the experience that you would normally have in a traditional campus environment or even retail. And, as you mentioned, she's really focused on how people consume. So it's really important to see how can we consume, or how are we going to consume in the infinite enterprise, and how the generation that's in the midst of this change is going to experience that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's go and have a chat with Michelle and see what she has to say.
I'm ready to learn.
Michelle, so excited that you're here. Really, I am personally very excited to speak with you because I'm dying to know, what do you think about how different generations are going to approach this idea of the infinite enterprise? And, how do different generations, in your view, when you are looking at how people take on and adopt new habits, what are the differences you're seeing between, sometimes the scapegoat and sometimes beloved millennials, Gen Z, the great generation? What are the different ways that they're approaching things?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, different generations have different levels of interest, different levels of adoption in new technologies. And if you look at boomers and millennials, they always hark back to the good old days, the good old days when you could get a newspaper and, spend hours reading the Saturday paper with all the different sections spread around and your big cup of coffee. And, they remember a time when you would, get together with friends and not have a phone or be reachable. And you had the one-on-one individual time where you could be in the moment. They hark back to those days. Whereas you look at the generations of the millennials and the Gen Z, they don't have that reference point to go back to. It's not about adoption to them because they've been born into this world. They're so intimately immersed in technology that it's not so much about adoption, it's all they know. And so it's a very different mindset. I would say that it's not even about how they take on or how they feel about technology. It just is what it is. It's their life. Where you have the other generations that are always harking back to the good old days of before. So I hope that answers your question. It's a different mindset. I don't even think we could talk about how they adapt or what their engagement is with the technologies, because technology for millennials and Gen Zs isn't a thing. It's just the world they live in.
Is there a significant difference between millennial adoption of technology and Gen Z's adoption of technology? Is there something that has changed other than the technology over that span of time?
I think it depends, because you're looking at a pretty broad cohort, right? So millennials is such a broad, it really depends on if you're kind of at the beginning or at the end of it. But, millennials are considered, digital natives. They're the first generation of digital natives, where Gen Zs are the second generation. So even within millennials, you have individuals that remember a time without it. They've seen the evolution of tech and how it's come into their world. They've seen how it's been able to enhance their world. Whereas the Gen Z generation, it's not even about enhancing, because it is what it is. It's the world they live in. So it's a different reference point. And it's also, even in terms of consumption, I would say, millennials are, the always on, always want to be reachable, always want to be contacted. Whereas the Gen Z generation, they're very aware that they do not always want to be reachable. They want to turn off They understand the difference. They want to break away from it a little bit, even though they're so much more intimately immersed in it. I think millennials are more about viewing, where Gen Zs are more about creating and being right in the middle of it.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I don't think I've ever heard before. And, granted, it's not like I'm an expert at Gen Z or anything, but I hadn't heard before that they are much more comfortable with that boundary. But to your point, I guess it's because they've always been immersed in technology, so they can create that boundary for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, they're a living, breathing generation of dichotomy. Like they're so intimately immersed in it, but they understand how immersed they are. And actually, they're the one generation, when we talk about, Gen Zs going out into the workforce, they're the ones who are most nervous about their soft skills. So their tech skills are great. They want to be working with cutting edge companies and cutting edge technology. Their biggest fear is that they don't have the right soft skills. And obviously, we see soft skills as a result of them not having that one-to-one interaction with people in the way that other generations have had in the past. So, it is a bit of a contradiction for sure.
Do you think that their expectation in the workplace, if they are given the opportunity to be able to have that workplace experience at home without having to go into work because they are concerned about those soft skills, do you think they're going to be much more likely to adopt the ability to work from home, or is that going to be their expectation now? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think we saw it a lot with millennials. Millennials were wanting to do things on their own terms. They're almost coined as the lazy generation. Non-ambitious, or not wanting to work hard because they want the balance in their life. I think that's carried through a little bit to the Gen Z population. I read an interesting article the other day about how we're going to have to rework the workplace for Gen Zs because everything is open concept, and they don't have a desire to work in a big open concept space. They're more individual thinkers. And so we're going to have to accommodate for that individuality where it's not so open and broad. So I think the way they approach things are quite different. The balance is there, but unlike their predecessors, they are a generation that is driven by money and by ambition. They do want to work hard. They do want to create, whether that's, in person with people or at home. I think that they would want a balance between the two because of their awareness of being too much online all the time. But I do think we are going to see a greater emphasis on the flex and the technology that's going to drive the flex.
What really interested me, what you just said about their desire to not want to be in an open space or in a shared open space. Does that translate to things like their consumption habits? So being able to shop online obviously is convenient, but what would be their next preferred way of consuming online? Is it a virtual store? Does it go beyond just purchasing online from online retailers? Have they formed a new way of consuming?
So I think, the largest way Gen Z consumes is really through Instagram, through social media. It's through the platforms that they're already engaging with. So it's less about finding another platform for them to go to. It's about retailers and marketers going to where they are currently. I think that's the flip of it. It's interesting when you talk about, how they purchase, because unlike any other generation, they're not interested in badges. Like they're not buying items for the Gucci, for the badge that particular high-end brand is going to display. That's not to say that they're not spenders. They do like premium products, but it's all about individuality. So if you have a product that no one else has, that's very specific, that's short-term items that are just, created in small quantity, that's what they want. They want things that are individual and different. So I don't think the mass retail experience is for them. And I think that creating a separate entity for them to go to is not necessarily the right approach. I think it's about finding them where they are and going to where they are.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you've said something that we've talked a lot about on the podcast, and it's hyper individualism. We think that is a big element that will play out in the infinite enterprise, and it's interesting that Gen Z is already demonstrating that in how they purchase things. I've being a millennial 1.0, I am on Instagram and I see the vitamins that are specifically created for my genetics and what I'm looking for. And I, as a millennial, I look at that and I go, that's a bunch of hooey. But, for Gen Z, I could definitely see how they want everything to be customized to them and specific to them. Um, do you think that they're going to expect that their shopping environment, their shopping experience, or their medical experience and their educational experience will want to be totally they will expect that to be customized to them as well? And that some of the institutions that we have in healthcare and education will have to adjust to meet this demand?
I do. I really, really do. And I've seen evidence of it. I've seen brands that are coming out with, personalized, it's personalized meal plans based off of your genomes and nutrition. Like it's so individualized that I see it only going deeper and deeper, particularly for this audience. I definitely do see that.
Is that a scary thing? Is there an element of privacy that we should be concerned about when it comes to that kind of individualization or hyper individualization?
I don't know. I mean, I think it depends. Depends how you look at it and through what lens you view it. If you're speaking about, medical advances and working with our genetic makeups and catering products to what is going to be best for our health based off of how we are made, each of it as individuals, I don't think so. But of course, the Gen Zs are concerned about privacy. Like it's interesting. You wouldn't think that a generation that has grown up in a world where they've always had accessibility to information and they've always lived in the world of the internet, but they do have a concern for privacy, for sharing of information. That is definitely a concern for this generation. So I think companies are going to have to be very mindful of how they approach that and make sure that they offer a sense of security with anything that they do. So of course, it's about finding that balance between creating something that's super individualized, but still maintaining the security and the safety of the Privacy Act. So that's going to be a balance. I mean, I look at it more when it comes to consumption, the clothes we wear, the foods we eat. People want things that are made just for them. They're not, this generation, they're not followers, they're individuals. And everything they do in terms of, what their purchase consumption is, how they act. They're a strong generation. They're a generation that's going to change the world because they're leaders. They're not just going to follow trends and what they've seen in the past.
Yeah, so Generation Z sounds like they are going to be a very powerful and influential generation, which is really exciting. As someone who looks towards the generations coming up, it is exciting to feel like, we're going to leave the world potentially in better hands. But the one question that we haven't really addressed yet is, you take this generation that has grown up with this technology, they're super aware of the importance of their privacy. They want everything to be hyper individualized. How does the pandemic impact how they think about things? So they were already kind of operating in this bubble of, I want things to be the way that I want them tailored to me. But then you also further remove them from society for an extended period of time, and you interrupt, the institutions that they do go through, some of the social norms. How does that impact their thinking, their decision making, and ultimately their expectations when they are adults?
I don't have any real data to back this up, but I can tell you what I feel is that, this generation has probably been the least impacted by the pandemic to date, because they're a generation that they're so used to interacting in the online virtual world. It's something that they've grown up with. They're super comfortable with it. It's a language that they inherently speak. When they go on their devices or their computers, they're not going on to really observe, they're going on to participate. So they are very into games like Roblox, like Fortnite, like Minecraft. And these are social games. They're used to making friends who they never actually meet in person, but they interact with online and they become very close with. They've been able to maintain a level of interaction and humanity and friendship that a lot of other generations have just not been able to do because they're so well versed in that. They've really been able to be there and to thrive in it. So I think that sociability and that element that has affected a lot of us very deeply during this pandemic is something that they've been able to escape. So, yes, the human interaction component has been missing. I think that it's even bigger than that. I think that, when you talk about speaking to this generation, they actually absorb information differently than a millennial or a Gen X or a boomer does because they have been grown up and immersed in this world of tech. They think differently. The actual physical makeups of their brains are different, which is so fascinating. The way they consume information, they're on multiple devices at any given time. They're multitasking. They want information like this. They have access to the information at their fingertips, and they're able to iterate in such a massive, quick way that that's only going to be beneficial. But the way we actually appeal to them, you talk about universities and libraries and how we actually speak to this audience, we need to change how we educate them because they actually absorb information in a much different way than the rest of us do as a result of how they've grown up in this native digital environment. So it's interesting when you start to peel back all the layers. Their brains are different. The way they absorb information are differently. Their ability to react and iterate quickly is a different approach. So how we educate, this cohort, but also, as they come out through the on the other side of the pandemic in terms of the jobs or the careers that are open to them, such a valuable generation because we're losing pace. We're a little bit behind because of the pandemic. This is a generation that's going to move things along super quickly because they're used to speed and they're used to iterating on the fly.
So that's a little terrifying to me because I'm a Gen Xer and I'm afraid that I'm being out evolved. So is there a change that is outside of my grasp at this point now with what's happening with the pandemic and the experiences that we're having? Is Gen Z way ahead of me? Am I now going to be lost and relegated to the dustbin of technological history? And, if I think about my 10-month-old son, is he going to out-evolve me at this point? Is his brain going to be significantly different due to his experience, not only as the future generation, but also as somebody who was born during a pandemic?
I don't know if it will kind of evolve us, but I think it will definitely be different. Listen, we talk about you've got the soft skills where your son may not have as great of a set of soft skills as you do. Our skills are different. And that's what's amazing is that you take these two cohorts and you put them in an office together and you talk about, how we can grow the economy. We have so much to learn from one another, right? We come from different places, our upbringings are different, our views on the world are different. And so, your son is going to probably teach you more about, digital tech than to date, but you have a lot to teach him as well. I mean, I see it from my kids too. The ability for them to pick up a device and to inherently know what to do and to not be afraid is very different. And it's almost mind blowing because they speak this digital language. They're so used to it. They're so comfortable with it. That they can just go on and inherently do things that I could not do or I would have to learn to do. So it's just a different approach. It's like they've grown up in a different galaxy than us, so to speak.
Yeah, well, technically they have in some cases.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what I find really exciting is it seems like technology is finally evolving at a pace that's going to match their demands. Would you feel like that's safe to say that might be a positive result of this pandemic and, the adoption of, the infinite enterprise?
I think so. I mean, I think that I think it was coming. I think the pandemic has certainly accelerated the speed at which things have become adopted. Things like virtual care that was kind of on the edges before is now a lot more mainstream. So I do think that the pandemic has accelerated. But I wonder if there's going to be a little bit of a regression once we are out of the pandemic. I do wonder if there's going to be a huge desire and need for human connection. And you will almost go above and beyond to visit someone. You'd rather see a doctor live because of the interaction that you've been missing. I think we're going to go through a period of transition where we're almost going to come out and overdo the connection part of it because of what's been missed, and then I think it will balance itself out again.
Will the brain changes of the of Gen Z cause another pendulum shift back towards that hyper individualization after that experience of going out and being able to hug other people? Have we gone past a tipping point where the hyper individualization will continue?
I think the hyper individualization is there, and there's a lot that we can benefit from it. And I think, I think it's going to continue. I don't think it's just a trend that we're seeing. I think it's going to be just the new normal. I think even when we look at, Gen Z as a population, they curate a lot of information. So they don't just observe. Like when they go onto their social platforms, they're creating, they're creators, they're creating, they're posting, they're developing content. Like they want to be a part of the story, and they always want to be iterating and doing. And I think it all comes from just a desire to be someone, and to look at the world and to contribute to the world. Millennials were all about posting pictures of happy people, their husband, their boyfriend, like shiny, happy people. The world is amazing. Like there's, no one gets upset. There's no bad days on Instagram or Facebook.
Guilty as charged.
It's a very millennial mindset, but Gen Zs, they're out there posting the nitty gritty. They're all about authenticity. They're about realness and grit. And so as a result of that, I think it's, they want to lead, they want to do things differently. They want to be individuals. I think that's a theme we see from this generation. And again, who knows what comes after Gen Z and when that ends. I think, the interesting thing about this is that, there's a 1996 is the age that they have stated as the start of Gen Z, but there's no end. So the question is, when does that end, and when does the next mindset start, and what is that going to be about? Is it going to go back and change? Is it too individualized, and are we going to go back to more of a group think mentality? It's really hard to say.
Is it possible that the pandemic is actually going to be the thing that ends Gen Z? I mean, is that possible?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, Gen Z, it's such a group of highly motivated, ambitious, career and money-driven individuals. They want to change the world. They want to work in high-tech companies with high tech that's evolving. They want to iterate. They want to be involved in change. So I don't see that as the pandemic hasn't changed it. I think they've just found other ways to do it.
So as we're coming to the end of our time here, Michelle, one big question I have for you before we go is that if you were a business that was going to take advantage of the acceleration of the infinite enterprise and technology, and you wanted to be able to attract Gen Zers in the future, whether it's to a university or to come and work at your company or as a shopper, what's the most important piece of advice that you would give to them? What's the one thing you'd say, this is going to be applicable to this generation as a result of their experience, and this is something you should consider as you develop your business operations moving forward?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. One thing that we haven't touched on is the fact that, this generation is the most socially conscious generation, and they are intensely idealistic. So they look at a business and they ask the business, what is your vision? What is your mission? what are you doing? What are you putting out there that's good for the world and good for me? So any company that wants to cater to this segment has to be authentic and real and have a mission. I think that's going to be key as you speak to this particular audience. And of course, anything that's exciting and tech-based is a huge appeal for Gen Z. So I think with those two things in mind, if you could have that secret sauce of, something that's, super high tech and on the cusp of innovation and interesting, but that's also social and morally conscious, I think that would be success.
Fantastic. Well, there we go. That is the final word for this episode on Generation Z. Michelle, I have to thank you again so much for sharing your thoughts. That you've given us so much to think about to inform this conversation.
Thank you for having me. Very fun. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Carla, I feel I'm being out-evolved. I'm going to stick to maybe some of the ridiculous stereotypes on generations, but what Michelle said initially on sort of explaining the generational differences was really fascinating. Gen X remembers the way it was before technology, right? Mm-hmm. And we remember the snap of the newspaper, and we some of us want to go back to that in some ways. Millennials are the first generation to grow up with this technology, to have computers built into the experiance.
Go with the flow, man. Go with the flow.
Right.
And make it pretty.
That's right. Looking pretty on Instagram. Right.
Hey.
Gen Z, I think, was really fascinating to me because this was a new way of looking at the generation for me. So Gen Z is going to change the world, and Michelle said that Gen Z loves the gritty reality of things, mm-hmm. which is really interesting because I think there's a combination of sort of a Gen X and millennial mindset there, and that they're creators.
They are.
I think that was really powerful. I had not thought of that before.
Yeah, that struck me because I hadn't thought of them as creators. But to be fair, I'm leading the millennial generation. So we, of course, still think we're the best. But, what really struck me is that when you break that down between what are, stereotypical definitions of those generations, what really informed and defined all of that when you were going through it is technology, right? It's the technology that has formed these generations. And I think that's a new thing. I think that, and maybe it's not, maybe if you look back, you can see how generations have morphed by defining moments. It's been usually by defining moments in history and also defining moments in technology. And, what I thought was really interesting that she said about Generation Z, and I'm really interested by this generation because they've grown up with technology being the norm, unlike my experience, which is I can remember the snap of the newspaper. I remember the rotary phone, but I grew up with a mobile phone as well. Like that happened to me when I was a teenager. That was a thing.
Right.
But for this generation, they grew up swiping left, right. They go up to TVs and try to swipe TVs because they have this expectation that technology will go there.
Right.
And what I was really struck by was the fact that she said, actually, Generation Z has been the least impacted by the pandemic.
Yeah, that was surprising.
Yeah, that was really surprising. And if you think about it, she's right, because they have been forming their relationships virtually forever. That is their norm. This has not been something that they've had to pivot to. And I think what that led me to conclude a bit is that the pandemic is an inflection point, if you will. It is an inflection point, but it's an inflection point for technology. It's giving technology the opportunity to catch up to the demands of this next generation, which I think is really pretty cool.
Yeah. They're driving the requirement, right? And that requirement has continued to escalate as they've become more and more hyper-personalized. And because that is now absorbed into them, and that they in fact may be physiologically different because of their experience with technology, means that they may never have any concept of what going back means.
Right.
So here we are in a circumstance where we are literally having a view that is prior to a physiological change. They are living in it. So it was really surprising to me. And one of the joys of doing a podcast like this is having the opportunity to hear somebody say things like that, and to then try and apply it to yourself so that you understand where your biases may be and where your experience of the infinite enterprise may be different from somebody who is perhaps younger than you or has different experiences than you.
Yeah. And I think, them Gen Z being creators, while the infinite enterprise is developing in it, we've taken this opportunity because of the pandemic to probably accelerate this adoption. If we don't figure out how to embed decency and a sense of ethics within this technology, it sounds like Gen Z is going to do that because they expect it. That's the expectation.
Right. And I hope they do, actually. I think that's really important to build into a technology is a sense of ethics. What we've seen through social media is that ethics can sometimes be set aside just for the platform itself. So I think that concept of building in ethics into the infinite enterprise will take us beyond, I think, what we've experienced with social media and technologies from, the millennial generation going forward.
Yeah. So I mean, my big takeaways from this was I was so excited we had Michelle. She was so insightful, but big takeaways are Gen Z really perhaps not as impacted by the pandemic as we had expected, but we are now going to accelerate because of it and meet their level of expectations for technology, but they are going to make sure and create a level of decency and ethics within it. And, they're the generation that's going to be the shift, which makes me a little sad as a millennial. I thought I was pretty cool, but that sounds pretty cool what they're going to do.
I still think you're cool. Don't worry.
Oh, that's because you're a grandpa.
Well, let's leave it to them to change the world, shall we? We'll take that ride in our own experience.
All right.
Join us on our next episode of Inflection Points as we delve into the rapidly expanding world of esports with our guest, Danny Brady, Senior Data Engineer at Cloud9 Esports. Danny will walk us through how esports has been impacted by the pandemic, the current technology challenges within the industry, and how the infinite enterprise can learn from the future of professional gaming. If you would like to find out more about the Office of the CTO at Extreme Networks, find us on LinkedIn and check out the Extreme blog at www.extremenetworks.com.